sometimes you'll read something and you'll be like, okay, there's something really interesting here. And you'll talk to the filmmaker and the filmmaker can't really articulate why they want to tell that story, why they need to tell that story. You're like, something doesn't quite feel authentic about that. It's so interesting how often that little suspicion teases out to be a bigger problem later on. We didn't want to just rely on what other people said was good or who other people said was good. We wanted to be able to say, there's something in this filmmaker or there's something about this, and then just kind of back that. A new and personal voice and energy combined with something that feels like it is a theatrical proposition from the get-go. Those two things are key qualities.
Sam Jennings, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's excellent to be here.
I'm really excited to talk to you today. You're a producer with an incredible track record of work, taking Australian feature films particularly to the world. You've done Cargo, the global horror film sensation Talk to Me, Of an Age, which won the Best Film Prize at Cinefest Oz. You have Went Up the Hill and The Weed Eaters about to come out this year, and a couple of other productions that have just wrapped. So you're incredibly busy. Such an amazing slate of projects through your production company Causeway Films, which you joined in 2014, working alongside producer Kristina Ceyton. And I'd really love to talk to you today about talent development. You two have such a strong track record of taking new talent and giving them global opportunities to tell their stories. Tell me about your partnership with Kristina. How did that come about and how do you collaborate on projects?
Kristina and I had sort of known each other and sort of informally collaborated, just giving each other feedback and thoughts and advice and so on for some years before we decided to join forces in Causeway Films. I'd been working in development in agencies, but also primarily like with scripts and writers. She came from production background. So in lots of ways we were quite compatible and we had different backgrounds, but we realized quite quickly that we had very similar taste and very similar kind of values in terms of what we cared about and what we thought was important and how we like to work and how we like to work with filmmakers. So it was a really organic connection. I guess just out of that, we just naturally decided it felt really right to partner. And so we decided to come together and form Causeway just before the Babadook premiered actually at Sundance. So that was, I don't know, 12 years ago, 11 years ago, something like that. In terms of the way we work. So Kristina and I, we choose all the projects together. We both need to be really kind of like excited about a project to bring it onto our slate. We don't have a huge slate. We're very, very kind of selective in terms of what we take on. So we choose projects together. We develop them together. We tend to finance and package together, but around that time, really often to do with sort of workload, time, availability, one of us starts to take the lead so that one of us will always be on the ground during the filmmaking process with the director. We sort of build them together and we choose the talent together, but then one of us will take the lead.
Can you dig into that taste and values a little bit more? Have you ever articulated together what it is that you look for, or does it kind of come as a vibe or an instinct?
I think a couple of the things that we connected on really early were just on a basic taste level, what moves us, what we find exciting, filmmakers that we think are kind of have a unique kind of perspective or something special to say. Sometimes it's just an energy, sometimes it's a very clear point of view, sometimes it's a very clear voice, but we kind of felt very aligned straight away on what we thought was exciting. It was really important to us to discover new talent, always from the beginning, to not necessarily just go with the sort of an established set of filmmakers, to kind of find interesting and varied voices within, I guess, the Australian industry and now in many ways internationally as well. Like that was very important to us. So we kind of really just connected in terms of also how we like to give feedback, how we like to support the filmmakers, the fact that we do think it's really important that producers are very much a partner in the trenches with the filmmaker and that together you can make decisions that are very aligned so that the creative and the practical elements are absolutely kind of inseparable from the beginning. And I guess we both also felt that it's important to understand and believe in the vision of the filmmaker. And once you do that, everything has to align with that and be committed to serving that vision, every choice that you make, whether it's big or little. And I think we also both had a strong desire to look to the international marketplace. Like, we really wanted to be in the global conversation. So the international audience was always really important to us with all our projects. So we wanted to find interesting talent in Australia and put that on the world stage. And that was something we always felt very committed to.
And have done very well at that over a period of more than a decade now, which is so exciting. Given all of the changes in market that have taken place over that time, have you made a specific decision to continue solely with features, or are you looking at branching out into other areas as well?
We have for a while had an open mind about that. I think for us, it's just completely material driven. So I think that the kind of series we might want to get into, I think, would be similar to the kind of thing that attracts us to feature projects, very much about the authorship, the voice, international audience, something that feels fresh and exciting. So, it's something we're open to, but we've been very busy with features and we love features. So that's very much our focus.
So let's talk about talent. Where do you start? Do you have a process of identifying talent? Are you out and about at film festivals or talent incubators specifically trying to find people, or do they tend to come to you?
Finding talent is a really hard thing to pin down, and it's also something that's been a great priority and pleasure for us for years, because there is such interesting talent out there that's not necessarily sort of visible at first glance. Or, sometimes you kind of have to find people who have just been doing their own thing for a while. We look at short films festivals, what's kind of got attention or won awards at festivals. We look at work online. We read scripts and material that gives you a sense of, filmmaker's voice or who's working in what area and what they're interested in. It can take a while. I think this is something important to remember. Like, these relationships can grow over years. Like, often we're tracking a filmmaker for some time, and then it's the combination of like a talent we think is interesting and a concept that they come up with or that they present that is something that feels like a really good fit. It's really just trying to be aware of and engaged in who's coming through and what they're doing and what the conversations are about, and constantly trying to be tapped into that, because you can find talent in interesting ways. Like, someone like Goran Stilevsky, we'd sort of heard that this short had won this prize at Sundance. He won Best International Short at Sundance. Like, who's this Australian filmmaker, Turns out he had like half a dozen feature scripts he'd already written and a huge body of work. Danny and Michael Philippou, completely different. They were sort of assistants on Babadook. They worked on Cargo as kind of zombies. And then I did a sort of a workshop with them, which was kind of about people who'd been very successful in online, kind of converting to long form storytelling, and just realized how talented they were. And so really kept in touch with them. And then they sent us a bunch of concepts, and Talk to Me was one of them. And it just felt really right as a first feature for them. But that was after, tracking them for some years. So it's that kind of like you keep an eye out for people, you have a sense of what they're doing, and then sometimes just it happens that at the right time something clicks and they've got a project or they pitch a concept that just feels like the right match, and we feel like we can fully commit to. And so it's all different ways you find people.
When you say the right match, you obviously have a business to run. So what are the elements that you're looking for, both creatively and from a market sense?
I think that, it sounds like it's all the usual words and cliches, that people talk about in terms of having a unique vision. I think that what's really interesting is you can find emerging talent, but they're people and filmmakers that have spent some time honing their own voice. Like, they have worked out who they are, what they want to talk about, and how they want to say it. It's really something you admire. You can find people that have just sort of gone about developing their voice as filmmakers. And I think that's a really important talent to have. So when you might read a script or see a short film, you can just sense that. I think that's really increasingly important, that sense of, like, particularly with original material for the world market, it's very important to have a particular perspective and style that you're offering to the conversation. Apart from that, I think it's increasingly important in the current market that feature films in particular sort of earn their big screen real estate. So they are a theatrical proposition, that they're a theatrical event, that there is a reason that's inherent to the project that people will want to see it in a cinema. I think that's becoming more and more important. The combination of those things, something that sort of feels like a new and personal voice and energy, combined with something that feels like it is a theatrical proposition from the get-go. Those two things are key qualities. And it's something you can't entirely analyze in a way. Kristina and I have this kind of 3 o'clock in the morning rule. Like, we read a bunch of stuff where we think, oh, this is really great. This is really good. Yes, this all makes sense. But it's like whether you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and feel like, if we don't make this, I'm going to die, Like, you could analyze it and you can have the criteria, but like ultimately it's going to be about whether you want to commit years of your life to supporting a filmmaker to bring that particular vision to life. And that has to just feel like a burning, urgent thing.
Let's talk a little bit about that support in the context of that vision or that personal voice. You have to go and sell these people to financiers, especially as first-time feature filmmakers. What does that take, and what do you work with them on in terms of materials and presentation and concept to get those projects over the line creatively?
I think different projects benefit from slightly different sort of packaging or different presentations. This is why it's important for producers to have a very personal urgency to make a film, because when you're pitching to the market, that comes across, that authenticity. You really need to communicate why this film needs to be made. I think with first-time filmmakers, obviously there is more weight on the concept and story. You can't just sell a project on a director when they're new. I think it's a combination of being able to pitch the premise and the story in a big picture sense in a way that's captivating. I think that things like pitch decks and mood reels are a huge benefit visually, because you're also trying to communicate what is distinct about the director's vision and give the investor confidence that that filmmaker, even if they are new to feature filmmaking, that they absolutely can deliver on that vision in a sophisticated way. The other thing with debut features is it's important that the budget isn't crazy high. Usually with debuts, you can't get huge cast, but smart cast. Smart casting is really important. People that are quality actors, but maybe like unexpected in a certain role. So there's something fresh and exciting about that particular actor doing that role. Or you're putting together an ensemble of really interesting actors where the combination of them is really cool. You just have to really think about how to convey the vision, how to give confidence to the investor, and how to have something fresh and tantalizing for audiences, both in terms of premise and in terms of the way the film is cast, without relying on big, huge names.
So easy.
Not easy, and doesn't get easier, but that's part of the fun, right? It's a challenge.
What are your thoughts on proof of concept short films, or having done work in the past that speaks directly to the feature story or, tone at least?
I think it is important, if you're pitching a first-time feature director, that their short work gives an indication of the style and tone of the feature. It doesn't need to be completely aligned, but gives a sense of how they can execute a certain tone. That said, I think proof of concept short films are useful, but not so much if they feel like they start to hijack the process of developing and packaging the feature itself. It can happen that sort of doing a proof of concept actually can hijack that process a little bit and end up kind of taking focus and time. So it's kind of a matter of making sure that the momentum of the feature is still intact. I think it's very important to us and the way we work that we don't have projects in development for years and years. I think it's something we saw and learned from very early on, that you can really lose momentum on a project and it loses its freshness and its urgency. And it's really important that things are developed and financed within a sort of fairly concise time frame, because I think it affects the actual work, which is partly why we don't have a huge slate, because if we take on a project, we kind of want to make it, and we want to make it within a couple of years. So I think it is important with proof of concept short films that they don't waylay that process, but it is also very hard to pitch a feature if the short work or the director's previous work is too much in a different realm. That said, I remember with Talk to Me, like obviously Danny and Michael's online work was completely different. what talked to me was, it was hard to convince investors that they have this incredible body of work on YouTube, but that's a particular part of what they do. And their feature filmmaking is something a little bit different. But they still got to make that film without, making a proof of concept shot.
And when you talk about budget levels, is there a particular dollar range that you're specifically looking for?
It's increasingly hard to make features in Australia on a shoestring. It's really tricky. But I think really a model that can work quite well is in that sort of let's say 4 to 6 million kind of budget range, so that it's a modest budget that you can get, if you can piece together a bit of soft money, the marketplace risk is kind of doable. It's not too crazy in terms of what a private equity investor or a sales agent might need to put in to get the film made. So you're kind of trying to contain the risk as much as possible, but you still want to deliver at the highest level you can and make sure that the quality is something that would go to A-list festivals and have, a long life in the marketplace. It used to be you could make a sort of 2 to 3 million low budget feature. I think now it's kind of more like 4 or 5 or even 6 is kind of still that sort of low budget. But it is a viable model as an Australian production. It can allow you to keep the rights. It can allow you to have a long tail in the international marketplace. And it can, if it breaks out, it can be good for everybody.
So you've worked with directors from a range of different backgrounds and pathways. Are there any common traits that you recognise in them in terms of their skill sets, their personality, or specific things that you think they're worth backing?
Every filmmaker is so different. I would say self-motivated is a huge one. It distinguishes people more and more, I think, over time, how self-motivated and self-disciplined they are. Perseverance is incredibly valuable in our industry. It's a hard industry, it's hard to keep going. And by perseverance, I don't mean endlessly hassling people. I just mean making stuff because you love making stuff and you're totally committed to that and you're going to find a way. And it's not about validation from this, that, or the other. It's about the fact that you really just want to keep doing that and you'll find a way to keep doing that. And as I say, a commitment to honing your own voice. I also think something that does make feature directors in particular stand out for us, I would say, would be an understanding of their audience, which I know kind of sounds general and obvious, but it's a really particular thing. Whether that audience even exists yet or not, some filmmakers just know who they're talking to. And it doesn't have to be a big audience. It's just they're very much connected to who they see sitting in the cinema watching their film and what they want to give that audience, how they want that audience to experience their work, how they want them to feel when they leave the cinema. It's a really particular thing, and it can come, there can be very different kinds of audiences, but a really connected understanding of who's going to be sitting in your cinema watching your film and what they're going to get from it really distinguishes some filmmakers, I think. I mean, Danny and Michael being an example, although a lot of the filmmakers we work with repeatedly kind of have this, where they can pretty much almost tell you the color of the shirt of the person sitting in the third row. It's they know exactly okay, these people are going to laugh at this. These ones aren't going to find this funny. They're so honed about, and obviously in their case, that comes from a lot of years of a very direct relationship online and being able to kind of break down the analytics of who's watching, who's turning off their work at a certain point, what they're responding to. They read all the comments, everything on Letterboxd, you know what I mean? So it's a very direct personal relationship to that audience and understanding of what they come for, what they want, and what they walk away with. And then you can kind of play with that, expectations, and then, be aware of sometimes, how you're moving within that. It shouldn't feel like a imposition, but it's just about wanting to talk to that audience and knowing who they are. And I think that that's something really, really valuable in filmmakers, feature in particular. And as I say, it can be a small audience, but it's about a direct dialogue.
And do you find that for the most part, the directors are that audience, or have you seen cases where it's an audience that's not them, but they understand them?
I think there are cases where it's not them, but they understand them. I think it's more commonly that the directors are envisaging themselves, but I think the more that they can think of the audience outside of themselves, probably the more useful it is for their work. We can't help but, be telling stories to ourselves in some way, but the more that you can kind of put yourself in the shoes of the people watching it, particularly people who are paying potentially $25 for a ticket, you know what I mean? The more useful it's probably going to be to your work.
Mm. Speaking to that $25, you've mentioned theatrical a couple of times. What to you is the difference between a theatrical feature film and something that might go straight to streaming or home entertainment?
Look, it's a constant kind of question to be. A lot of us are kind of, constantly asking, because it's not something that's that easy to define. People talk about theatrical event, people talk about big screen experience. I mean, what's really exciting is people going back to the cinemas, but they're often going back to the cinemas because they want that kind of communal experience of something that feels, big and exciting, and that you want to see, with the big sound, and that you want to see with a group of people going, I think that the kind of more contained, lower stakes drama kind of world is much more, there's such quality, television in terms of the kind of insightful drama, which, there's still very much a place for, but it's sort of, you kind of need to compete at that Oscar nomination kind of level for that material, because I think a lot of people, now that there's so many franchises and there's so many, it's so IP driven, that people, get used to paying that kind of money for a ticket for things that are going to be, a big visceral group experience. A lot of the time they're rewatchable, and they'll want to take their friends back, the following week, and that kind of thing. Just something that feels like an immersive experience on some level, and one that you would want to have in a collective group, as a collective experience. If you look at something like Weapons, obviously the appetite, or Sinners, the appetite for original material is really there, which is super exciting. They are theatrical experiences, they're very clearly designed for a theater, with people watching them with, other people, and enjoying the unexpected moments and the shocks and the, or even something like The Substance. I think, these are theatrical propositions. It's something about wanting the ritual of the theatre and going, and what motivates that.
And are you reading scripts with that in mind, of going, this is an emotional experience? This is a point where I feel like that audience is going to collectively gasp or cry or feel something?
I think so, yes. But first and foremost, it's whether we're gasping and crying and feeling moved, because I do think you have to have it has to be driven by that very personal connection and commitment. But yes, definitely. I think increasingly we will look at the impact and resonance of a project, and the emotional and visceral impact of it. I think it is really important. And that's why we often work in a kind of genre space, because, like, particularly with, horror, there's been room to be kind of bold in the filmmaking and allow quite an immersive experience at a relatively, low budget, where you can actually create that kind of cinema experience for an audience without, it costing a fortune or having to be studio driven or IP driven, So I think that's a genre that's allowed for boldness and risk taking and fun in terms of execution.
It sounds like you read a lot, and you would be approached now, especially with so many concepts and people wanting to work with you. How does that process work in terms of getting something in front of you or Kristina? Do you have a wider staff at Causeway? How can people get that concept in front of you?
We do have a bit bigger team now at Causeway. We have a head of development and a development coordinator, so they do receive and read a lot of material. We also have now a head of production and a CEO, which is fabulous, because it was really just Kristina and I and an assistant for years. We do read a lot, and our team reads a lot. Often it is from recommendation, or we've asked to see something. Initially, in terms of unsolicited projects, we would look at the concept documents, short synopses, that kind of thing, to see if something really connects, or, we'd also look at the filmmaker's work. So then kind of go from there, and then read scripts. And look, we don't take on a lot, because, as I say, we want to make the things that we commit to, and we want to make them within a period of time of, 2 to 3 years max probably, and keep up that momentum. And we do work very hands-on through development as well as, every stage of sort of financing and productions. But it's really important to be constantly open to reading material and seeing what's out there and knowing who's making stuff. And it's always changing, and there's always really exciting things going on. And I think something that Kristina and I always agreed on early on is that we would back our own judgment and take risks, that we didn't want to just rely on what other people said was good or who other people said was good. We wanted to be able to say, oh, there's something in this filmmaker, or there's something about this that, and just kind of back that in each other and ourselves and take a risk on that. So we do like to read stuff ourselves.
So we're really interested in pathways and new opportunities, especially as the industry is changing so much. And I'm curious if you have any advice for people who may be looking to come up and become a global feature director. In this new world, where would you start, and what would be the key steps that you would take to give yourself the best chance of success?
Now, in particular, it's important for new and emerging filmmakers to create communities, to have a community of collaborators that they make stuff with, that they talk to. They can generate a set of principles and feedback for each other that maybe, expands from that. So there can be work that comes out of that. There can be conversations. This can be communities within like social media. It doesn't need to be kind of in-person events. But I do think connecting with a community and a network of peers is incredibly important, because more now than ever, that generating of material to then get traction, to hone your skills, to get a conversation going, to build something is incredibly important. And I think it's important, particularly in terms of the Australian industry, that we don't view other filmmakers as competitors. This is really about, we are all in this together and we can build something great together, because there is an opportunity to build your own audiences without relying on the traditional models as much.
And on the flip side of that, what makes you say no to someone?
Sometimes you'll read something and you'll be like, okay, there's something really interesting here. And you'll talk to the filmmaker, and the filmmaker can't really articulate why they want to tell that story, why they need to tell that story. It can start to feel like, oh, someone said this was a good idea, or I want to be a filmmaker, so I thought I'd do something like this, or the market wants this right now, so I thought I'd write a story about that, or just kind of a vagueness around what it is they're saying and why. I think the most telling thing when you speak to a filmmaker is how clearly they can crystallize why they're making a film. Because if a filmmaker can't articulate it to us, it's harder for them to articulate to other people. And then if there's not a really core sort of guiding light that is going to attract everybody to that project, and everybody's going to understand this is why we're making it, you can't fabricate that. That's got to come from inside. So I think that's probably the biggest sort of danger sign for us, is when we feel like there's a sort of a vague or external or kind of sometimes almost cynical reason to be making something.
And do you think that's ever a communication issue that could be honed, or do you think they just don't have that authentic connection to the work?
I think it's more an authentic connection to the work, because it's not about the words you use or how practiced or polished it is, or you can get a very polished pitch, but it feels kind of empty. I don't think it's about the polish of the presentation. I think it's about the authenticity of the filmmaker's connection to the material and what they're doing. And I think that's something you can get a sense of, and that authenticity is something audiences need as well. Like, audiences are very tuned into that now. They absolutely want authenticity and a real reason for making something. If motivations feel fake, you can feel it in the material and in the team and the way it's made. So I think it's authenticity more than it is about articulation.
And that starts with the moment that you read something on the page and see the vision that can carry through to the end of the project.
Yeah, totally. It's just, and you sometimes have this feeling, you're like, something doesn't quite feel authentic about that. And often you can dig into it, talk to the filmmaker, and it's so interesting how often that little suspicion teases out to be a bigger problem later on.
Well, this has been so valuable. I know people are going to get a huge amount out of it. We have one final question that we ask all of our podcast guests, and we'd like you to pitch an idea that you think will improve the industry for the better. So if you had one big idea, what would it be?
The thing that I think is most urgent in the Australian industry is I think we need to put serious resources into building a young audience for our own stories and our own films. I think that there should be a concerted effort to look at new ways of distribution, new distribution companies, new venues, new screens, new viewing patterns, changing the way cinemas exhibit Australian work, having cheaper tickets for young people who want to go and see Australian work, retrospectives of Australian work. We need to build our future audiences for our own cinema, and we need to do that outside of the traditional distribution models that we've got. I would much rather, even with our own films, be able to make less of them if I know that the resources are going into building young audiences for our own stories, because there's incredible talent here. And I think it's underserved in terms of what is going on in this culture. Like the whole old Australiana version of what an Australian film or an Australian story is completely outdated. I think we live in a very vibrant, diverse, largely urban, very culturally informed country. And I think that we need to reflect that. There's so much curiosity in young people now about cinema, about cultural engagement, about diversity of storytelling. Like, this is the time to build a future audience and to change the way we exhibit and distribute and promote our films to our own audiences.
So important. If someone handed you a couple of $100 million right now, what would be the first thing that you would a couple of $100 million, what would be the first thing you would do with it?
That's one thing I'd do. I'd go and get one of those, that old one of those old cinemas, right? And just make it beautiful and show Australian films there and do amazing retrospectives and nights and have people curating, the film clubs and Australian, work, a complete range of Australian work over time and different auteurs, and actually build a community around our own history of cinema and our future of cinema and engage young people in that and make it fun. I think I'd also talk to exhibitors, distributors about, is there a night a week that that we can go and see Australian films for half the price? Is there a couple of sessions a week in particular cinemas where you play a certain Australian director's work? We have such a rich culture, such a diverse culture, so much talent here. We need to put it on the world stage, and we need to put it on our own stage in a fresher, more exciting way.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sam.
Oh, no, my pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
We Interrupt This broadcast is recorded on the unceded lands of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation and the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and we acknowledge them as the traditional custodians and first storytellers of these regions. Always was, always will be.